Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive building in front of him. Nexus Prime Academy stretched across the horizon like a crystal mountain. The walls were made of some kind of blue metal that seemed to glow in the alien sunlight. 3 different suns hung in the purple sky above the school. This was his new home for the next 2 years. Jake was 16 years old and had never been away from Earth before. His parents thought it would be good for him to learn about other species in the galaxy. They said it would help prepare him for the future when humans would work more closely with aliens. Jake picked up his bag and walked toward the main entrance. Other students were arriving too, but none of them looked like him. A group of tall, crystal-like beings floated past him without touching the ground. Their bodies sparkled like diamonds, and they made soft chiming sounds when they moved. Jake had studied about them in his prep classes. They were called Zephyrians, and they were supposed to be very smart. Near the entrance, Jake saw some students that looked more familiar. They had 2 arms and 2 legs like humans, but they were much taller and thinner. Their skin was pale blue, and their heads were longer than human heads. These were the Velnari. Jake remembered reading that they could read minds and speak without using their mouths. The most impressive students were the ones that looked like walking tanks. They stood over 7 feet tall and had thick, scaly skin that looked like armor. Sharp claws stuck out from their hands and feet. Their eyes were yellow and seemed to glow. Jake knew these were the Thakari. His study material said they came from a very dangerous planet, where everything tried to kill everything else. Jake walked through the main entrance and found himself in a huge lobby. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it. Hundreds of students from different species moved around, talking in languages he had never heard before. Some made clicking sounds, others whistled, and a few seemed to communicate by changing the colors of their skin. A small robot rolled up to Jake. It had a friendly blue light on top and spoke in perfect English. "Welcome to Nexus Prime Academy, Jake Morrison. Please follow me to the orientation hall." Jake followed the robot through several corridors. The walls were covered with pictures and information about the different species that attended the school. He stopped to look at a display about humans. The description was only a few sentences long and seemed almost apologetic. "Humans are the newest species to join the Galactic Education Consortium," Jake read quietly. "They are still developing their technology and social structures. Please be patient with human students as they adapt to galactic standards." The words made Jake feel embarrassed. It sounded like the school thought humans were stupid or backward. He had always been a good student on Earth, but here he felt like he was starting at the bottom of a very tall mountain. The robot led him into a massive auditorium filled with new students. Jake found an empty seat near the back and sat down carefully. The chair was designed for beings much larger than humans, so his feet barely touched the ground. A Zephyrian teacher floated onto the stage. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music mixed with the ringing of bells. A translator device in Jake's ear turned the sounds into English words. "Welcome, new students, to Nexus Prime Academy. You come from 12 different worlds and represent the finest young minds in the galaxy. Here you will learn not just about science and mathematics, but about cooperation and understanding between species." The teacher began explaining the school rules and schedule. Classes would cover everything from basic galactic history to advanced physics. Students would live in mixed dormitories to encourage interaction between species. There would be competitions and projects that required teamwork across species lines. Jake noticed that every time the teacher mentioned humans, other students would turn to look at the human section of the auditorium. Their expressions ranged from curious to dismissive. Some of the Thakari students seemed amused, like they were looking at pets rather than fellow students. After the orientation, Jake found his dormitory room. His roommate was already there, unpacking clothes that looked like they were made of liquid metal. The alien turned around and Jake saw that it was a Velnari. "Hello?" the alien said without moving its mouth. The words appeared directly in Jake's mind. "I am Zinara. You are the human student Jake Morrison." Jake nodded, still getting used to the telepathic communication. "Yes, that's me. Nice to meet you." "I have read about your species," Zinara continued. "You are very young compared to galactic standards. Your planet only discovered faster than light travel 20 years ago." "That's right," Jake said, trying not to feel defensive. "But we learn fast." Zinara tilted its long head to one side. "Learning speed is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom comes from time and experience. Your species has very little of either." Jake unpacked his belongings in silence. Everything he had brought from Earth seemed primitive compared to the technology around him. His electronic tablet looked like a stone tool next to Zin-Ara's floating data display. His clothes were simple cotton and synthetic materials, while his roommate's garments seemed to shift and change color by themselves. That evening, Jake went to the dining hall for dinner. The room was enormous, with tables designed for different species' needs. Some tables were near the ceiling for flying species. Others were partially underwater for aquatic beings. Jake found the section marked for humanoid species and got in line for food. The serving machines could produce almost any kind of food imaginable. Jake selected items that looked familiar and safe to eat. He found an empty table and sat down to eat alone. As he ate, Jake watched the social dynamics around him. The different species seemed to naturally group together. Zephyrians floated in clusters, communicating through light patterns. Thakari sat in groups and seemed to be competing over who could eat the largest quantities of meat. Velnari gathered around tables and appeared to be having multiple telepathic conversations at once. A few other human students were scattered around the dining hall, but they all looked as lost and out of place as Jake felt. One girl was sitting by herself reading from an Earth book. A boy at another table was trying to figure out how to use the alien eating utensils. Jake finished his meal and headed back to his room. Tomorrow would be his first day of actual classes. He hoped things would get better once he started learning alongside the other students. Maybe if he worked hard and proved himself, the other species would start to see humans as equals rather than primitive newcomers. But as he walked through the corridors, Jake noticed how the other students moved aside when they saw him coming. It was not done out of respect or courtesy. They moved aside the way someone might move aside for a small child or a harmless pet. Jake realized that earning respect at Nexus Prime Academy was going to be much harder than he had imagined. 3 months had passed since Jake arrived at Nexus Prime Academy, and he had learned many things that were not in any textbook. The most important lesson was about power and who had it at the school. The official rules said all students were equal, but the reality was very different. Each species had its place in an invisible ladder of importance. At the top were the Zephyrians, respected for their intelligence and advanced technology. Below them were older species like the Velnari and the Korathi. Near the bottom were newer species like the Brintani and the Helios. At the very bottom were the humans. Jake had made 2 friends among the other human students. Amy Chen was the daughter of an engineer who helped design the transport ships that brought humans to alien worlds. She was smart and always asked good questions in class, but the alien teachers often ignored her raised hand. Marcus Rodriguez came from a family of diplomats. His father worked to create trade agreements between Earth and other planets. Marcus spoke 3 alien languages but still struggled to fit in with non-human students. The 3 humans often ate lunch together and shared their experiences. Amy had tried to join a study group with Zephyrian students, but they told her humans would slow down their learning. Marcus had volunteered for a cultural exchange project, but the Velnari students said they did not want to share their thoughts with such a primitive mind. But the worst part of school life was not the casual dismissal from teachers or the cold treatment from other students. The worst part was Taextel was a Thakari student who stood nearly 8 feet tall. His scaly skin was dark green with black stripes, and it looked thick enough to stop bullets. His claws were always visible, sharp and yellow like old bones. When he walked, the floor seemed to vibrate under his weight. Other students moved out of his way automatically like water flowing around a rock. Kextal had gathered a group of followers from various species. There was Vex, a Korathi whose species had natural weapons built into their arms. Synth was a Brintani who could change the color and texture of his skin to become nearly invisible. Reyes was another Thakari, smaller than Kextal but still bigger than most other students. This group had made themselves the unofficial police of the school's social order. They decided who was allowed to sit where in the dining hall. They determined which students could use the best study areas in the library. They enforced the unspoken rules about which species could speak to which other species. The alien teachers seemed to think this was natural behavior. When Jake complained to Professor Veltar about Kextal pushing smaller students around, the Zephyrian had dismissed his concerns. Young Thakari must establish dominance patterns, the teacher had explained. It is how their species develops proper social structures. You should observe and learn rather than interfere. Jake had watched Kextal operate for weeks trying to understand the pattern. The big alien never picked on anyone who could fight back effectively. He avoided Zephyrians because they had powerful technology and political connections. He left most Velnari alone because they could read his intentions before he acted. Instead, he focused on species that were smaller, weaker, or lower in the social hierarchy. The breaking point came during a lunch period in the 3rd month. Jake was sitting with Amy and Marcus when they heard a commotion from across the dining hall. Caxtel had cornered Zinara, Jake's Velnari roommate, near the drink dispensers. Little mind reader thinks it can sit at any table it wants, Caxtel was saying in his deep, gravelly voice. Someone needs to teach it about proper order. Zinara was trying to back away, but Keekstel's followers had surrounded the small Velnari. Raze and Vex blocked the escape routes while Synth moved to cut off access to the main dining area. Please, Zinara said aloud, too frightened to use telepathy. I was just getting nutrition fluid. I meant no disrespect. Kextel reached out with one massive hand and grabbed Zinara by the arm. The Velnari's skin was delicate and pale, and Jake could see bruises forming under the Thakari's grip immediately. Maybe you need to broadcast some embarrassing thoughts to everyone here, Kextal suggested with a cruel smile. Let everyone know what a weak little creature you really are. Jake stood up from his table. Amy grabbed his arm. Don't, she whispered. You'll just make things worse, but Jake was already walking across the dining hall. Other students noticed and conversations began to die down. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when the primitive human confronted the apex predator. Let him go, Jake said when he reached the group. Kextal turned around slowly, still holding Zinara's arm. The Thakari looked down at Jake with genuine amusement. The little human wants to play hero. How entertaining. I said let him go, Jake repeated. Kextal released Zinara, who immediately fled toward the exit. The big alien took a step closer to Jake, using his height and bulk to intimidate. You seem to have forgotten your place, human. Would you like me to remind you? Jake could feel hundreds of eyes watching them. Students from every species had stopped eating to observe the confrontation. Some looked excited, others appeared nervous. A few seemed to be recording the interaction on their personal devices. There shouldn't be places, Jake said. We're all students here. Kextal laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Spoken like a species that has never had to fight for survival. Your kind lived on a soft world where everything was handed to you. You know nothing about real strength. Maybe not, Jake admitted. But I know bullying when I see it. The Thakari's eyes narrowed. Bullying? I am teaching proper social order. The strong lead, the weak follow. This is natural law throughout the galaxy. Not where I come from, Jake said. Kextal leaned down until his face was close to Jake's. His breath smelled like raw meat and sulfur. Then perhaps you need to learn some new lessons about how things work here. Jake did not back down, even though every instinct told him to run. He had seen what Kextal did to students who showed fear. The bullying only got worse until the victim was completely broken. I'm not afraid of you, Jake said quietly. Kextal straightened up and looked around the dining hall at his audience. Did you hear that? The human says it is not afraid. How amusing. The Thakari's followers laughed on cue. Other students continued to watch in silence, but Jake could see the pity in their expressions. They all expected the same outcome. The human would be humiliated and put in his place. We will continue this conversation later, Keekstal said with a predatory smile. When we have more privacy. Jake walked back to his table where Amy and Marcus were waiting with worried expressions. You should report this to the administration, Amy suggested. Marcus shook his head. They won't do anything. The faculty thinks this kind of behavior is educational. Jake sat down and tried to finish his meal, but his appetite was gone. He could feel Kextal watching him from across the room, planning something. The confrontation had bought Zinara some safety, but Jake knew he had painted a target on himself. Over the next few weeks, Kextal began a careful campaign against Jake. The Thakari was smart enough not to do anything that would bring official attention. Instead, he used subtle methods that were hard to prove or report. Jake's assignments mysteriously disappeared from his locker. His personal belongings were rearranged in his room while he was in class. Students who had been friendly to him suddenly started avoiding him. Someone spread rumors that humans carried diseases that could affect other species. Jake endured it all without complaining. He knew that showing weakness would only make things worse, but he could see that Kextal was building up to something bigger. The Thakari enjoyed psychological games, but eventually he would want a more direct confrontation. Jake began to prepare himself mentally for what was coming. He had hoped that intelligence and determination would be enough to succeed at the academy. But it was becoming clear that some problems could not be solved with studying and good intentions. Some problems required a different kind of solution entirely. The harassment continued for 3 more weeks. Kextal seemed to enjoy the slow process of breaking down Jake's resistance. Every day brought new problems that could not be proven or reported. Jake's study materials would be damaged. His food would taste strange, as if someone had added chemicals to it. His sleeping schedule was disrupted by loud noises outside his dormitory window during the night. Amy and Marcus tried to help, but they were dealing with their own problems. Kextal's campaign against Jake had spread to include other human students. The message was clear. Humans who stepped out of line would face consequences. The other species at the academy watched this process with interest, as if they were observing a scientific experiment. Jake's grades began to suffer. It was hard to concentrate on studies when he was constantly looking over his shoulder. His teachers noticed the decline but offered no help. Professor Veltar actually seemed pleased, as if Jake's struggles proved something about human limitations, perhaps. This experience will teach young Morrison about the realities of galactic society, the Zephyrian had commented to another teacher, not caring that Jake could hear. Jake's roommate Zinara tried to offer support through their telepathic connection, but the Velnari was careful not to be too obvious about it. Kextal had made it clear that anyone who helped Jake would become a target themselves. "I am sorry," Zinara said quietly one evening. "I wish I could do more to help you." "It's not your fault," Jake replied. "You didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did you," Zinara pointed out. "You could have stayed silent when Kextal was threatening me. You chose to intervene," Jake shrugged. "Someone had to." "That is not how most species think," Zinara explained. "Most beings will not risk themselves for others unless there is some benefit. Your kind seems different in this regard." Jake had never thought about it that way before. On Earth, helping people in trouble was considered normal behavior. Parents taught their children to stand up for those who could not defend themselves. It was basic human decency. But as Jake observed the other species at the academy, he began to understand that this attitude was not universal. The Zephyrians were logical and calculating. They would help others only if it served their own interests. The Karathi had complex honor codes that determined when intervention was appropriate. The Velnari could sense emotions and thoughts, but they rarely acted on that information unless it affected them directly. Only humans seemed to have this instinct to help strangers without expecting anything in return. Jake wondered if that made his species noble or just foolish. The answer to that question would come sooner than he expected. It was a bright day on Kepler 442b, with all 3 suns shining in the purple sky. The academy's main courtyard was filled with students enjoying their lunch break. The courtyard was a large open area surrounded by the school's academic buildings. In the center was a decorative fountain that sprayed water high into the air in complex patterns. Jake was walking through the courtyard with Amy and Marcus, discussing their upcoming physics exam. The test would cover advanced concepts in quantum mechanics that were difficult even for human students who had grown up with Earth's relatively simple physics. "I still don't understand how the Zephyrians can manipulate space-time with their crystals," Amy was saying. "The mathematics don't make sense according to Earth physics." "That's because Earth physics are incomplete," Marcus replied. "We're still learning how the universe actually works." Jake was about to respond when he noticed a familiar sound, the heavy footsteps of Kextal approaching. The big Thakari was walking directly toward them with his usual group of followers. Other students in the courtyard began to move away, creating a clear space around the coming confrontation. "Well, well," Kextal said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Look what we have here." The 3 little humans huddled together like frightened prey animals. Jake stepped slightly in front of Amy and Marcus. "We're not looking for trouble, Kextal." "But trouble has found you anyway," the Thakari replied with a cold smile. "I think it's time we settled our ongoing discussion about proper social order." Students from all over the courtyard were gathering to watch. Some climbed onto the edges of the fountain for a better view. Others floated or flew to higher positions. Within minutes, hundreds of alien students had formed a large circle around Jake and Kextal. "This is not necessary," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We can resolve this through the proper academic channels." Kixtal laughed and several of his followers joined in. Academic channels? You mean those Zephyrian teachers who think humans are barely evolved above animals? They won't help you, little human. No one will help you. Jake looked around the circle of watching students. Their faces showed various emotions, excitement, curiosity, pity, but no sympathy. These beings had watched Kextal terrorize other students for months without ever intervening. They would not start now, you see? Kextal continued, enjoying the moment. You are alone here. Your species is weak and primitive. You have no natural weapons, no advanced technology, no psychic abilities. You are nothing but soft meat pretending to be civilized. Jake felt something shifting inside him, like a pressure building behind his eyes. He had endured weeks of psychological torture, watching helplessly as Kextal hurt other students. He had tried to do things the right way, following rules and procedures that were designed to keep humans at the bottom of the social hierarchy. I want you to get down on your knees, Kextal ordered. I want you to admit that humans are inferior to all other species. Say it loud enough for everyone to hear. Amy grabbed Jake's arm. Just do it, she whispered urgently. It's not worth getting hurt over. But Jake was no longer listening to rational advice. Something primal was awakening in his mind. Something that his species had carried for thousands of years. He looked up at Kextal's confident face and felt the pressure behind his eyes growing stronger. No, Jake said quietly. Kextal's smile faded. What did you say? I said no. Jake's voice was getting stronger. I won't kneel to you. I won't apologize for being human. And I won't let you hurt anyone else. The Thakari's eyes narrowed with anger. Then I will teach you the lesson the hard way. Kextal reached out with one massive clawed hand and grabbed Jake by the throat. The alien's grip was incredibly strong, designed to crush the necks of predators on his homeworld. He lifted Jake off the ground easily, intending to demonstrate his physical superiority to the entire courtyard. Last chance, human, Kextal growled. Submit or suffer the consequences. Jake looked into the alien's yellow eyes and saw the same predatory confidence that bullies throughout the galaxy use to dominate their victims. For a moment he felt the familiar urge to give in, to accept his place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Then something else took over. Jake's hands moved without conscious thought, reaching up to grab Kextal's wrist. But instead of trying to break free from the grip, Jake did something that no Thakari had ever experienced before. He began to attack the pressure points and nerve clusters that humans had mapped on their own bodies through thousands of years of combat. The effect was immediate and shocking. Kextal's confident expression changed to one of surprise, then pain, then genuine fear. His grip on Jake's throat loosened as unexpected sensations shot through his nervous system. But Jake was just getting started. The pressure behind his eyes had become a roaring flood of ancestral memory. Every dirty trick that humans had ever used in warfare came pouring out of his subconscious mind. Every underhanded tactic that had helped his species survive on a world full of predators suddenly became available to him. Kextal tried to tighten his grip, but Jake twisted in a way that the Thakari had never seen before. The human's movement was not the honorable combat of civilized species. It was the desperate, vicious fighting style of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its food chain through pure ruthlessness. Jake's feet found purchase on Kextal's armored chest, and he pushed off with surprising force. The sudden movement caught the big alien off guard and sent him stumbling backward. Jake landed in a crouch, his eyes now holding a light that made several watching students take involuntary steps backward. You want to see what humans really are? Jake asked, his voice carrying a tone that no one at the academy had ever heard before. Let me show you. The fight that followed would be talked about in whispers for years to come. Because what the galaxy learned that day was that humans were not just another species of primitive newcomers. They were something much more dangerous. Survivors from a world that had taught them to be perfect killers. What happened next took only 90 seconds. But those 90 seconds changed everything the galaxy thought they knew about humans. Kextal recovered from his initial surprise and charged at Jake with all the fury of his predator species. His claws extended fully and his armored bulk moved with shocking speed. This was how Thakari fought on their homeworld. Direct assault with overwhelming force. It had never failed him before. But Jake was no longer the same confused human boy who had arrived at the academy 4 months ago. Something ancient and terrible had awakened in his mind. The polite veneer of human civilization had been stripped away, revealing what lay beneath. Jake did not meet Kextal's charge head-on like a civilized species would. Instead, he moved sideways at the last possible moment, using the alien's momentum against him. This was not the honorable combat taught in galactic military academies. This was the fighting style of a species that had survived by being smarter, faster, and more vicious than everything that tried to eat them. As Kextal rushed past, Jake's hands found the joint between the alien's neck armor and shoulder plating. Human fingers, soft and seemingly weak, suddenly became precision instruments. Jake pressed against nerve clusters that Thakari anatomy had never evolved to protect. Kextal stumbled and roared in pain. The sensation was completely foreign to him. On his world, combat was about claws and teeth and brute strength. No predator had ever attacked him in this strange, targeted way. The watching students gasped as they saw the mighty Thakari warrior struggling against a much smaller opponent. This was not how the natural order was supposed to work. The strong dominated the weak through superior physical power. That was the law of the galaxy. But humans had never followed galactic law. They had written their own rules through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Jake stayed close to Kextal, moving inside the range of those deadly claws. The Thakari tried to grab him again, but Jake was no longer where he expected. The human moved like liquid mercury, flowing around attacks and striking back at places that should not have been vulnerable. Kextal's followers tried to intervene, but they quickly discovered that approaching Jake was like trying to grab a buzzsaw. The human's awareness had expanded beyond normal limits. He could track multiple threats simultaneously while continuing his assault on their leader. Vex, the Karathi with weapon arms, fired energy blasts at Jake's back. But the human somehow sensed the attack coming and used Kextal's body as a shield. The energy hit the Thakari instead, causing him to bellow in rage and turn on his own ally. Synth tried to use his camouflage abilities to sneak up on Jake from behind. But humans had evolved to detect hidden predators, and Jake spun around before the Brintani could complete his approach. A quick strike to the alien's throat sent Synth gasping to the ground. Raze, the smaller Thakari, charged with claws extended. Jake stepped aside and caught the alien's wrist, twisting it in a direction that Thakari joints were never meant to bend. The crack of breaking bone echoed across the courtyard. All of this happened while Jake continued his primary attack on Kextal. The big alien was discovering that his natural armor, designed to stop claws and energy weapons, was useless against human creativity. Jake targeted joints, pressure points, and nerve clusters with surgical precision. Worse yet, the human was not fighting with emotion or anger. His movements were calm and controlled, like a machine designed for violence. This was not the passionate combat of young warriors proving themselves. This was the cold efficiency of a species that killed to survive. Kextal tried every fighting technique his people had developed over thousands of years. He used his size advantage to pin Jake against the fountain. He attempted to use his claws to create distance. He even tried the berserker rage that made Thakari warriors feared across the galaxy. Nothing worked. Jake adapted to every strategy faster than Kextal could implement it. The humans seemed to understand combat at a level that no civilized species had ever reached. He fought like someone who had been born in war and raised in violence. The truth was more terrifying than that. Jake fought like someone whose ancestors had been doing this for millions of years. Earth had not been a safe world where civilization developed naturally. It had been a nightmare planet where only the most dangerous species survived. Humans had not evolved intelligence to create art and philosophy. They had evolved intelligence to become better killers. Every predator on Earth had contributed to human development. Saber-toothed cats had taught humans to move silently and strike without warning. Bears had taught them to use tools as weapons. Wolves had taught them to hunt in coordinated groups. Crocodiles had taught them patience and the value of explosive violence. But the most important lesson had come from other humans. For thousands of years, humans had fought wars against each other with increasing sophistication. They had learned to target weaknesses in armor. They had mastered the art of psychological warfare. They had developed fighting techniques that could kill opponents regardless of size or natural weapons. All of that knowledge was encoded in human genetics, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Kextal was getting tired. His powerful muscles, designed for short bursts of overwhelming force, were not built for extended combat. But Jake seemed to have unlimited endurance. The human moved like he could continue fighting for hours. The Thakari began to feel something he had never experienced before. genuine fear. Not the healthy caution that kept warriors alive, but deep primal terror. He was facing something that his species had no evolutionary answer for. Jake sensed the change in his opponent's emotional state and pressed his advantage. He began targeting areas that would cause maximum pain without permanent damage. This was not about killing Kextal. It was about breaking him completely. The human's hands found nerve clusters along the alien's spine. Pressure applied in exactly the right way sent waves of agony through Kextal's nervous system. The big Thakari dropped to one knee, unable to maintain his balance. Jake moved behind him and applied pressure to the base of Kextal's skull. The technique was designed to cause disorientation and nausea without causing brain damage. It was a move that human warriors had used to subdue prisoners of war. Kextal fell forward onto his hands, his vision blurring and his stomach churning. He tried to speak but could only make choking sounds. The mighty predator who had terrorized the academy for months was now completely helpless. Jake stood over the fallen Thakari, breathing hard, but still alert for other threats. His eyes swept the circle of watching students, and most of them took involuntary steps backward. They had just witnessed something that challenged everything they believed about the natural order of the galaxy. The small, soft humans were not weak prey animals. They were apex predators who had been pretending to be civilized. Kextal made one last attempt to rise, but Jake placed a gentle hand on the back of his neck. The pressure was light, almost friendly, but it conveyed a clear message. Any movement would result in immediate and overwhelming pain. Do you understand now? Jake asked quietly. His voice was calm and conversational, as if he were discussing homework assignments. Do you understand what humans really are? Kextal could only whimper in response. The proud Thakari warrior who had ruled through fear and intimidation was now reduced to a broken creature, begging for mercy. Jake looked around the courtyard at the hundreds of alien students watching in stunned silence. Amy and Marcus stood at the edge of the circle, their faces pale with shock. They had known Jake for months, but they had never seen this side of human nature before. Anyone else want to discuss proper social order? Jake asked. The silence that followed was absolute. 400 students from 12 different species stood frozen, afraid to move or speak. They had just learned that their comfortable assumptions about strength and weakness were completely wrong. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. The aftermath of the fight spread through Nexus Prime Academy like wildfire. Within hours, every student, teacher, and administrator knew what had happened in the courtyard. The story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained unchanged. A human student had single-handedly defeated the Academy's most feared bully and his entire group. Jake was immediately taken to the medical center for examination. The Academy's doctors, all members of advanced alien species, were amazed to find that he had suffered no serious injuries. A few bruises on his throat from Kextal's initial grip, but nothing else. Meanwhile, Kextal required extensive treatment for nerve damage and psychological trauma. The Thakari's injuries were not life-threatening, but they were completely outside the experience of galactic medicine. Human combat techniques had targeted parts of alien nervous systems that no one had ever thought to protect. The doctor spent days mapping the damage and developing treatment protocols. More disturbing than the physical injuries was Kextal's mental state. The proud Thakari warrior who had dominated the school through fear and intimidation was now afraid to leave his medical bed. He flinched whenever anyone approached him quickly. He refused to eat meals that were not pre-tested by medical staff. I don't understand what happened to him, Dr. Velnara explained to the Academy's administration. His people are bred for combat. They should recover quickly from defeat. But this patient shows signs of deep psychological trauma that may never heal. What the doctor did not understand was that Kextal had experienced something no Thakari was equipped to handle. He had been defeated not by superior strength or advanced technology, but by a form of violence his species had no evolutionary answer for. It was like being attacked by a force of nature that ignored all the rules of combat. The Academy's administration was in chaos. Principal Zextar called emergency meetings with representatives from all 12 species. The Galactic Education Consortium demanded immediate reports about the incident. Some species threatened to withdraw their students if humans were allowed to remain at the school. This changes everything, Professor Veltar admitted during one of the closed-door meetings. We invited humans into our institutions, based on incomplete information about their nature. The Zephyrian teachers who had dismissed humans as primitive, newcomers were now frantically reviewing all available data about Earth and its inhabitants. What they discovered was disturbing. Human history was filled with wars that made galactic conflicts look like children's games. Human literature celebrated violence in ways that other species found incomprehensible. Human sports were often based on controlled combat or symbolic warfare. They are not a peaceful species that recently discovered space travel. Dr. Kethera concluded after reviewing hundreds of human documents. They are a warrior species that has temporarily achieved peace through mutual assured destruction. Amy and Marcus found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Other students who had previously ignored them now approached with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Some wanted to know if all humans could fight like Jake. Others asked if they were planning to take over the school. "We're not violent," Amy insisted during one awkward conversation with a group of Velnari students. Jake only fought because he was defending himself, but the Velnari could read the emotions behind her words. They sensed the same potential for violence that existed in all humans, carefully controlled but always present. It was like discovering that the Academy's pet animals were actually sleeping predators. Jake himself was placed under observation while the administration decided what to do with him. He was confined to his dormitory room except for meals and classes. 2 security guards, members of the heavily armored Karathi species, accompanied him everywhere he went. The security measures were supposed to protect other students from Jake, but they had the opposite effect. Seeing the Academy's most dangerous guards treating a human teenager as a serious threat only reinforced the new perception of human capabilities. Jake's roommate Zinara was fascinated by the change in how other species viewed humans. "Before the fight, they saw your people as harmless primitives," the Velnari explained telepathically. "Now they see you as dangerous unknowns. Fear and respect are closely related emotions." "I never wanted anyone to be afraid of me," Jake replied. "I just wanted to stop Kixtel from hurting people." "That desire to protect others is what makes your species so dangerous," Zinara observed. "Most beings will only fight to defend themselves or their immediate family. Humans will fight to defend complete strangers. That makes you unpredictable." The turning point came 2 weeks after the fight. The Galactic Education Consortium sent a team of specialists to evaluate whether humans should continue attending integrated schools. The team included military advisors, xenobiologists, and experts in interspecies relations. Their investigation revealed something that shocked everyone involved. Jake's display of violence was not unusual by human standards. It was actually quite restrained. Human military training included techniques that were far more devastating than anything Jake had used. Human history contained examples of individual warriors who had defeated dozens of opponents in single combat. "We have been thinking about this incorrectly," Admiral Korthax concluded in his report. "We assumed that humans were a weak species because they lacked natural weapons and armor. But they compensated for these limitations by developing the most sophisticated combat techniques in the galaxy." The consortium's decision was unanimous but unexpected. Instead of expelling humans from the Academy, they offered to create new programs specifically designed around human capabilities. They wanted to study human problem-solving abilities and learn from human tactical thinking. Jake was given a choice. He could return to Earth immediately with no consequences, or he could stay at the Academy as part of a new experimental program. The decision was easier than he expected. "I came here to learn," he told the consortium representatives. That hasn't changed. The rest of the school year passed very differently than Jake had expected. His classes were redesigned to challenge human capabilities rather than ignore them. He was given leadership roles in group projects where his species' unique perspectives could be valuable. Other students began approaching him for help with problems that required creative solutions. Most importantly, the bullying stopped completely. Not just against humans, but against all species. The social hierarchy that had ruled the Academy for years collapsed overnight. Students who had been victims found their voices. Species that had been considered weak began asserting themselves. Kextal eventually recovered enough to return to classes, but he was a changed being. The experience had taught him something that his warrior culture had never emphasized. Sometimes the strongest-looking opponent is not the most dangerous one. He began studying human philosophy and history, trying to understand the species that had defeated him so thoroughly. "Your people are strange," he told Jake during one of their supervised meetings. You could have killed me easily, but you chose not to. Why? Because killing you wouldn't have solved anything, Jake explained. The goal was to stop the bullying, not to destroy you. Kextel struggled to understand this concept. In Thakari culture, defeated enemies were eliminated to prevent future threats. The idea of showing mercy to someone who could potentially become dangerous again was almost incomprehensible. This is why humans are so dangerous, he realized. You can be utterly ruthless when necessary, but you choose when to apply that ruthlessness. Other species fight by instinct. You fight by choice. As the school year drew to a close, Jake reflected on how much had changed since his arrival. He had come to Nexus Prime Academy expecting to prove that humans could be civilized members of galactic society. Instead, he had proven that humans were something much more complex and dangerous. The galaxy now knew that humans were not just another species of peaceful explorers. They were survivors from a world that had forged them into perfect predators. But they were also beings capable of choosing when to use that deadly potential and when to hold it in. Check that combination of capability and restraint would define humanity's role in galactic civilization for generations to come. Other species would approach humans with respect born of understanding rather than dismissal born of ignorance. And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, where old prejudices and ancient conflicts still simmered, there would be new whispers passed between species in frightened tones. Be careful with the humans. They are not what they seem. Jake graduated from Nexus Prime Academy with honors and went on to become one of the galaxy's most respected diplomatic troubleshooters. Whenever conflicts arose between species, human mediators were requested specifically because of their unique combination of tactical understanding and moral flexibility. The incident in the courtyard became part of galactic folklore, a story told to remind other species that appearances could be deceiving. But for Jake, it remained a reminder of something more personal, that humans carried within themselves both the potential for great violence and the wisdom to use it responsibly. That balance would define not just his own future, but the future of humanity among the stars.